What's the creepiest thing that's happened when you were camping or alone? Solo camping for the first time, intense struggling to sleep and all of a sudden hear what sounds like a demon screaming and beating its chest. Then another one. Turns out koalas make effing blood-curdlingly horrible noises at night. Wish I knew. I used to sleepwalk when I was younger but only really found out the first year I went away for summer camp. I would shower at night and go to bed clean, but wake up with mud completely caked up to my knees and no clue. Didn't happen to me, but not long ago. Maybe 3 months ago, I was camping and awoke to a family near me whose child had been abducted in dead set middle of the night. Major search operation underwent, and after 3 weeks or so, I think, the child was found alive and well. Needless to say, we'll never camp at that spot again. Survivors of attempted murder. What's your story? When I was a newborn, my biological father tried to kill me by choking me. It happened in my grandmother's kitchen and my mom bopped him over the head with a frying pan and stabbed him with one of those hot dog pokers you use on the grill. He's always been a real big piece of shit. I'm not sure if this counts exactly since the person wasn't trying to specifically kill me. But when I used to work at Starbucks, a guy was trying to kill his ex-girlfriend by causing a gas leak at our location with all of us still working there. Our shift supervisor smelled the gas and had us evacuate while calling the fire department. I remember thinking, wow, I could have died over some stupid high school drama. Made me realize that every time something bad happens to me, I shouldn't overreact to the point where it inconveniences others like I'm the only person with problems to deal with. Don't want to be like that guy. I worked with this idiot that decided to show off his new pistol before work one morning. My co-worker and I were standing right beside him. I always thought he was kind of a moron, so when I saw him messing with the slide of the pistol I decided to move back a little. And bang, the gun went off. He barely missed me and ending up shooting himself. The police asked if I wanted to press charges. I declined because I didn't want to ruin the guy's life. Serious. Redditors who've killed someone in self-defense, aka legally. What's your story? Before I wrote this I texted my therapist to see if she thought it was a good idea and she said to go for it. So here's what you asked for. I remember this vividly and deal with post-traumatic stress from it. 3 days after my 14th birthday a man broke into her house to steal some things. I was home with my 8-year-old sister. He didn't know we were in the house so I grabbed a cordless phone. Took my sister down to the basement and hid her in the bathtub. It's a finished basement. I dialed 911 on the phone and told her to tell the operator what was happening. Then I unlocked the gun safe and took out my dad's short shotgun, the kind with 2 pistol grips. I loaded it and went back to the bathroom. My sister laid down flat on the floor on the tub and talked with the operator. We lived in a remote area so I didn't know how long it would take for the sheriffs to arrive. I remembered a conversation with my dad where he said in a life or death situation, any indication of aggression is enough. Protect yourself. The bathroom was locked. When he got down to the basement he eventually tried to get into the bathroom. I said please leave us alone. I called 911. I'm scared and I have a gun. The man said are there any pills in there? To which I replied no. Then he said I don't believe you and kicked the door in. So I pulled the trigger, which laid me on my back because I, a scrawny 100-pound kid, had loaded a 12 grams pistol grip short barrel shotgun with .00 buckshot shell. It also blew out my eardrums. So imagine the next moments without being able to hear anything. If you're concerned about my sister's ears, the 911 operator had told her to cover them tightly when she overheard my exchange with the man. I got up and the man was in 2 pieces. Everything smelled like metal, fireworks, and shit. Kind of like when you're deer hunting and accidentally got shoot them. The shotgun had cut him in half. His legs were against the wall opposite the door. There were big holes in the wall and pieces of the door stuck in it. I found out later that some of the wood in the wall was pieces of the man's spine. There was blood everywhere. His upper half was next to them, kind of on its side. I don't know if he was aware of it, but he was still moving. Not twitching, more like flopping his arms around. His heart was still beating. I know this because it was squirting out of him and arcing along the wall with irregular spurts. His eyes were wide open and his mouth was mouthing the words "Mama, I'm sorry" over and over again. They stopped moving a moment later. It's been almost 25 years, many of those in therapy, and I still have nightmares. I don't go hunting anymore. I don't set off fireworks. And when someone says the phrase "I don't believe you," I am instantly transported back to the moment where I killed a man. I hear the sound, feel the wave of heat, and smell the smells all over again. I also don't celebrate my birthday, which is a hard thing to explain to people. My sister stayed in the bathtub until the sheriffs arrived, kept her eyes and ears shut tight, and one of the deputies carried her away from it all. She just knows the smell. The man's family tried to press charges, so we had to go to court, where I got to hear the 911 call over and over again and talk about what happened, why I made the decisions I made, and made to look like a villain who just wanted to kill someone. This is because it was the 90s shortly after Columbine, and Doom was installed on the family computer. Ultimately it was ruled self-defense and in defense of another. If you're curious about my sister, she also went to years of therapy, refused to sleep by herself, and eventually married a sheriff's deputy. They have 2 kids and she's very happy. I'm responsible for the deaths of several people. Around 4 years ago, I was a vendor on the darknet. It was a relatively short-lived thing. I was just doing it because I was too lazy to get a job and at the time didn't want to settle for the 9-to-5 thing. I wanted to start my own business, and use the drug money as a startup. I had been using myself for years. Along with it I met lots of people into the dealing scene, and eventually started dealing myself. I have a lot of anxiety though, so I hated meeting up with people in parking lots and I definitely didn't want anyone to know where I lived. That's when I read about the Silk Road and Ross Ulbricht being caught. Got obsessed with the idea of it. Got obsessed with learning OPSEC. All with the goal of eventually using my connections to start up my store. Well, after a couple of months I did. I started my store with 3 drugs, ketamine, meth, and some outdoor weed my buddy was getting for super cheap. All was going good for a few months. Had a couple thousand get stolen in an exit scam, but I had about $25,000 saved at that point, so it didn't ruin my life like a few vendors I knew of. Eventually, I met a local connect that came into town only once a week, but had fucking anything I wanted. Mescaline, LSD, mushrooms, PCP, even, and fentanyl. At the time, people weren't really cutting heroin with fentanyl. I mean, I'm sure people did plenty, but it was not nearly as commonplace now. People just did fentanyl, and still do. I put all my addresses into an Excel spreadsheet along with their name, zip code, order, along with the amount. At the time, I was selling some super white powdered mescaline. The fentanyl was also a white powder, very similar consistency. Long story short, my Excel effed up, or I effed up, and about 7 people's mescaline orders were filled in as fentanyl orders. They all went out. I didn't notice and kept doing my thing for a few days. After about 5 days, someone contacted me and told me their friend died from my mescaline. I immediately called bullshit and went to check my order log and scale up how much I had of my mescaline left. Well, I had about 11 grams more than I should have. I still don't know how the F it could have happened. I wasn't a user, but I was definitely high off dabs. I went to check my order log on the market to see if anyone had finalized on their purchase, and a couple of them were, but none from a specific day, including the person that messaged me. No one that had purchased mescaline that day had finalized their orders. The market I was on also had a feature to see the user's last activity, and none of them had logged in at least 3 days, most 2 days. I immediately deactivated my vendor account. I didn't even need confirmation. I knew what happened. I knew I just killed several people. I sold the rest of my drugs, converted my Bitcoin to cash, and moved the F away. Didn't speak to anyone for weeks. Found a job in a restaurant, living in a city I always wanted to. I haven't touched drugs since that day. I haven't had anything to do with that life since then. I still think about them every night. I saved their names and Googled them a few days later. I was able to find info on 4 customers that definitely died. One customer shared it with a friend. They both died. I don't know why I'm even posting this, mainly because I have no one to tell, and even if I did, I don't think I could. I spend my days sober, clocking into work, clocking out of work, coming home, playing video games. I'm a complete recluse. People I used to know have distanced themselves immensely, and I know it's because I'm a shell of my former self. I can't help it. Could I even tell a therapist about this? I don't feel like I deserve to be alive. Am I really living anyway? I don't even know anymore. Maybe this will help me feel better. Ex-prisoners of Reddit, what are your horror stories, things you wish you could unsee, and how did you cope with it while locked up? The story my uncle told is he was in a cell with like 16 guys. Occasionally the guards would open the door, spray a bunch of pepper spray, close the door, put on gas masks, and then come in swinging batons. In some county jails they have 190 degrees water taps. They're there so inmates can make oatmeal, soup, or coffee without a microwave or any kitchen appliances. Well, sometimes when there were fights, you would see an inmate fill a cup with 190 degrees water and a glob full of Vaseline. Then he would throw it on his opponent. Watching that will stick with me for a while. Mainly the terrible scream the man made as the Vaseline stuck to his face. He was taken to medical right after that. He had 3rd-degree burns all over his face and hands. The sound of a guy getting locksocked by several other inmates. What is the scariest thing you have witnessed with your own eyes? A job I used to work at, my boss had a heart attack in his office and died in the middle of the shift. The office lights were motion activated, so we thought he left to go something as it was dark. I went into the office to get a new radio and there he was, leaned back in his chair with his eyes wide open. Scariest thing I've ever seen. Saw an old man slip and die at a bus stop in Portland early in the morning when I was a teenager. That was sad. But what really shook me was the way he was picked up by an ambulance. The sidewalk was washed off and they left. Within 15 minutes people were occupying that space waiting for a bus, and it was like it had never happened. 15 years old, driving home from work with my mom late at night. Saw emergency lights ahead and we're eager to see what was going on. It ended up being 3 of my friends, killed on impact in a single vehicle car accident. My mom had just went through that intersection 10 minutes earlier on her way to get me. We stayed there for several hours and watched their cell phones light up in the wreckage before they pulled the car apart to get the bodies out. Dead body whose skin was literally moving because of all the maggots under it. Freaky AF. Truck drivers, what's a creepy story you've got from the middle of nowhere? Parked off an exit ramp at about 3 a.m. for my 10-hour. The moon was full and high, and I spotted an unmistakably human figure in a nearby cut cornfield. A little spooky, but I just wrote it off as an old-timer putting up a scarecrow for the grandkids. Started watching a few YouTube videos before turning in, and out the corner of my vision I thought I saw movement. I shut my lights off to get a good look, saw the figure but nothing else. I couldn't be sure, but it looked like maybe it was in a different spot, maybe a little closer even. I was definitely feeling a bit spooked. Highway was devoid of anyone besides a car passing every 10 minutes or so. I didn't want to, but I had to jump out to pee. I considered a bottle, but I told myself I was being childish. I took a look at the figure and it was right where I figured it should be. I hop out, walk between my truck and trailer and start leaking. Every fiber of my being wanted to look. I told myself again I was being foolish, but I couldn't help it. I looked out. The field was empty, the figure wasn't there. My stomach dropped. I pinched off and jumped back in. I took off down the highway. Didn't give one shit about a violation. Stopped 40 minutes up the road at a well-lit and very full loves. Haven't stopped on a ramp since. People that have gone to jail/prison or worked there, what are your most interesting, funny, scary or gross stories? I was a college instructor teaching in state prisons for several years. At first, I was a bit anxious about being in that environment. After all, I was in a room with about 24 convicted murderers, rapists, child molesters, and drug dealers. It wasn't exactly a welcoming place. But, after about a month, I realized that I had nothing to worry about. I was surprised to find that these guys were willing to put themselves in harm's way to protect the teachers. I had just started my lecture one day when a lockdown was called. Our room was locked, from the outside, and we could not move until it was over. We heard, coming from upstairs, what sounded like a riot breaking out. "Teach, get in the corner," one of my guys said, practically pulling me off my feet and pushing me into the corner furthest from the classroom door. The guys then proceeded, without saying a word to each other, to pile all of the classroom desks in front of the door and stand between me and said desks. They were creating a barrier to keep me safe. It turns out that the riot we heard was not as big as we feared, so the lockdown only lasted about an hour. Afterward, once we got the okay and the room was put back in order, I asked the guys why they did what they did. "Some motherfucker hurts you," one of the guys said, "all the teachers will leave. We don't want to lose our education because some assholes can't control themselves." Never camp alone with a camera. I'm 22F, an avid nature photographer. I regularly go on hikes into the deep middle of woods and forests to catch the rarest beauties of nature. Anyway, I head out to this location I've been meaning to go to for a while. Some of my photography friends have been before and got stunning photos of deer, badgers and various rare birds. I drove as far as I could before the woods started, parked my car up in a lay-by, grabbed my tent, camera and supplies and head into the forest. It was quite misty but the forecast said it would clear up overnight. I found a badger den after about 30 minutes of walking into the forest, so decided this would be the perfect spot to set up my camera to hopefully catch some badgers on film overnight. I pitched my tent just far enough away not to disturb or scare the badgers and went over to set up my camera. I had it facing so it would catch lots of the entrances in the same shot. Plugged it into the power pack and left it running. I had a motion sensor so if it was to catch movement overnight it would begin filming. Everything seemed fine. I was in the middle of the woods, away from any paths, so it was very unlikely anyone would disturb me in the night. The next morning I woke up and could see fresh trails around the den, so I knew I would have caught some badgers on camera. I was so excited. I tried to check the footage on my camera straight away but both it and the power pack had died, and unusually the power pack was no longer plugged into my camera. Weird. I was sure I had plugged it in. I just hoped it had enough battery to catch the badgers on film. I'd have been gutted if I'd missed them. Nervous I'd messed up. I decided to head back to my car to charge up my camera and have a look at the pictures. I packed up everything and walked back to the car. It took about half an hour for my camera to charge up and turn back on. It turns on and I go to my camera roll. The first video was of the badger den, but I couldn't see anything there. There must have been some movement to trigger the camera to begin recording but I couldn't see anything within the shot. It was recorded at 2:30 a.m. After about 20 seconds of nothing the recording stops. I flick to the next recording, and it's a photo of my tent. I flick to the next and it's a photo of me alone, asleep, inside my tent. This was followed by about 40 more photos of me sleeping in my tent. The final photo, taken at 5:30 a.m., about half an hour before I woke up, was a picture of my car. I could feel the fear rush over me. My hair stood up on the back of my neck. I began driving and I drove as fast as I could. There was no signal and no one was else around for miles. I managed to get home safely. I still don't know who took the photos or why they were taken. I've not been camping since.